Spring 1944. In a chateau commandeered by the Wehrmacht along the Norman coast, officers dine beneath faded chandeliers. The air smells of wine and cigarette smoke and confidence. On the long oak table lie intercepted Allied leaflets, propaganda, they assume, describing a new American formation, airborne infantry, trained to descend from the sky and strike behind enemy lines. The men laugh. Farm boys with parachutes, one says. They'll hang in trees before they ever reach a rifle. Another adds that no army, not even America's, could fight gravity and win. Their words echo through the hall, swallowed by the clinking of glasses and the hum of certainty. For months, the Germans have prepared for an invasion. The Atlantic Wall stretches for thousands of miles. Concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, barbed wire wound like thorns along the coast. General Rommel himself has inspected every beach, convinced that he has turned France into a fortress. From Norway to the Bay of Biscay, the Wehrmacht believes it knows where the enemy will come from and how to destroy them when they arrive. But the sky is another matter. It is too wide, too uncertain, too intangible to guard. Their radar watches the sea. Their guns face the surf, their strategies rooted in terrain they can touch. No one looks up. Across the Channel, in England's mist-shrouded fields, another army gathers in silence. They move at night, practicing drops, packing weapons, memorizing maps of villages they have never seen. Their commanders demand not strength, but nerve, the kind that leaps into darkness and finds purpose before the ground arrives. They are young, miners, clerks, students, shaped into soldiers who trust silk more than steel. They do not yet know where they will land, only that when the order comes, they will fall from the sky as the first wave of freedom. Back in the mess hall, the laughter fades into evening routine. Glasses are emptied, maps folded, uniforms brushed clean. Outside, the wind moves through the hedgerows. Quiet, patient, waiting. The Germans sleep beneath the illusion of control. Across the Channel, engines are already warming. The joke will not age well. But what they don't know is that the weapon they mocked will soon erase their advantage entirely. The United States Army, still learning how to fight a global war, dares to imagine something new. Soldiers who do not march to battle, but fall into it. They are called Airborne infantry, a phrase that sounds more like a gamble than a doctrine. Few in Washington understand it. Fewer still believe in it. But war has a way of rewarding audacity. At Fort Benning, Georgia, the experiment begins. Volunteers arrive by the hundreds, farmhands, factory workers, sons of miners and mechanics, drawn by rumor and pride. They are told that if they pass, they will wear silver wings on their chests. If they fail, they will walk away, broken, or not at all. The instructors do not shout encouragement. They strip weakness. Every tower climb, every jump from a mock fuselage, every mile run through choking dust is a test not of muscle, but of will. By night, searchlights cut through fog as men leap from 300-foot towers, learning to trust a harness and a moment of silence before the snap of the chute. At dawn, they run through red clay mud until their boots disintegrate. The barracks smell of sweat, fear, and iodine. The phrase that binds them, stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door, becomes both a command and a prayer. There are no guarantees. One wrong pull of a static line, one twisted ankle, and the dream ends. Failure is public, success temporary. Yet the ones who remain begin to change. Fear becomes familiarity. The wind, once an enemy, turns into an ally. The idea that a man can fall from the sky and still fight takes root not in policy papers, but in bruises and repetition. Inside the wider army, skepticism hardens into derision. Traditional officers dismiss them as suicide troops. Infantrymen joke that parachutes are coffins stitched from nylon. To the tank corps, they are irrelevant. To the artillery, invisible. But among their commanders, men like James Gavin and Matthew Ridgway, a different kind of belief forms. They see mobility as a weapon, unpredictability as strategy. Where others see madness, they see maneuver. Ridgway studies the failures of airborne operations in Italy, notes the power of surprise. Gavin writes that a paratrooper must be a philosopher in motion, alone, surrounded, yet undeterred. They speak not of glory, but of momentum, of the ability to collapse an enemy's sense of direction before the first shot is fired. By late 1942, the Army Airborne has forged its identity in wind and sweat. Those who graduate from Benning or Tokoa do not walk differently. They carry differently. Their posture is quiet, their humor dry, their courage earned through repetition. When they pin their wings for the first time, there are no parades, only the sound of the wind on fabric and the weight of what it means to fall willingly into chaos. They believe now, not in slogans, but in one another, not in doctrine, but in destiny. What began as an experiment has become conviction. Far away on the other side of the ocean, German intelligence notes this development in passing. Air troops in training, limited use anticipated. They file it under curiosity, not concern. But what they don't know is that these men, hardened in the Georgia wind, will soon descend into the heart of occupied Europe and rewrite the meaning of invasion itself. North Africa, November 1942. The night is black and windless above the Algerian coast as C-47 transports hum eastward. Inside, men of the 82nd Airborne Division grip static lines, faces pale under red cabin lights. Below them lies the first battlefield that will ever receive an American parachute. No one knows what will happen when the doors open. When the green light flashes, they jump. Some into clouds, others into the sea. Confusion begins before the first man hits the ground. Winds push them miles off course. Beacons fail. Maps mean nothing in the desert's featureless dark. Platoons vanish into silence. Radio discipline collapses. Units meant to land together find themselves scattered across 100 miles of wilderness. It should have been a disaster. Yet something unexpected happens. Stray groups begin to improvise. A squad meant to guard an airfield stumbles upon a German convoy and ambushes it. Another team holds a crossroads for hours, believing the entire division is behind them. In truth, they are alone. But in their isolation, they create the illusion of an army. By dawn, German communications are in chaos. Reports flood headquarters of enemy paratroopers everywhere. In reality, only fragments of the 82nd have landed, but they are loud, relentless, and unpredictable. Commanders realize that confusion, once a liability, can itself become a weapon. Over the following months, the lessons are dissected. Navigation errors are studied, equipment redesigned, and jump discipline rewritten. The experiment continues in Sicily, July 1943, Operation Husky. This time, more than 3,000 paratroopers take to the air. But the Mediterranean winds are cruel, scattering them again into the night. Allied anti-aircraft gunners, nervous and untrained, mistake the C-47s for enemy bombers and open fire. Dozens of transports are hit. Paratroopers leap through burning fuselages into tracer-lit skies. On the ground, chaos repeats itself. Entire companies vanish. Commanders die before issuing orders. Yet again, small groups seize villages, block roads, cut communications. One isolated team holds the Piano Lupo crossroads for 2 days, stopping a German armored column, long enough for seaborne troops to land safely on the beaches below. What was meant to be precision becomes improvisation, and victory grows from confusion. For the first time, the Allies glimpse the strange alchemy of airborne war. Its power lies not in order, but in shock, the ability to appear where logic forbids. Chaos becomes camouflage, surprise becomes structure. German intelligence takes note but remains dismissive. Analysts in Rome describe the operations as impressive stunts, brave perhaps, but irrelevant to a real war of divisions and tanks. To them, the airborne are still an eccentric branch, better suited for headlines than history. The Wehrmacht's doctrine remains unchanged. Wars are won on the ground, not in the clouds. Back in England, however, the lessons of Africa and Sicily are refined into doctrine. Training intensifies, navigation systems improve, pathfinders are created to mark drop zones with beacons. What began as trial and error is becoming a science, and the men who once fell by accident will soon fall by design. The Germans believe they have seen the full measure of this new force. They have not, for while they watch the beaches and the ports, the next invasion will not come from the sea. It will come from the night sky, and from men who have already learned how to turn confusion into conquest. By early 1944, the war in Europe has reached its hinge point. Hitler's empire stretches from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean, yet beneath its surface, the foundations are cracking. The Allies know that to end the war, they must breach the continent itself. That breach has a name: Operation Overlord, the greatest amphibious invasion ever conceived. But the beaches of Normandy, no matter how wide or well planned, are only the beginning. The real danger lies beyond them, in the web of roads, rivers, and bridges that feed the German defense. If the Allies fail to seize those arteries, the invasion will bleed out on the sand. The planners understand this with cold precision. They need soldiers to appear where soldiers cannot possibly be. The answer lies in the sky. In England's airfields, 2 divisions prepare for a task no army has ever attempted on such a scale. The 82nd and the 101st Airborne, veterans of North Africa and Sicily, are chosen to land behind German lines hours before the first landing craft touches French soil. Their mission: seize bridges, block reinforcements, and sow confusion deep within enemy territory. If they succeed, the beaches will hold. If they fail, the sea will become a graveyard. The numbers defy comprehension. 13,000 paratroopers, 2,000 C-47 aircraft, 800 gliders packed with men, jeeps, and artillery. It will be an armada not of ships, but of wings. From the start, the planners know it cannot be controlled. They can only choreograph the chaos. The jump zones are drawn in ink that feels like prayer. Sainte-Mère-Église, La Fière, Carentan, every mile of hedgerow, every river crossing, calculated and memorized. In the map rooms of southern England, British and American officers argue over weather reports, wind direction, moonlight. The invasion depends on a full moon to mark the coast and calm seas to steady the landing craft. Meteorologists debate like philosophers. Commanders listen in silence, pencils tapping over charts that may decide the lives of 100,000 men. German intelligence watches the build-up across the Channel but refuses to believe its purpose. They assume the invasion will strike at Calais, the shortest route, the logical one. Normandy, in their view, is secondary terrain. When reports of airborne training intensify, Berlin dismisses them. "No army lands from the air and lives," one general remarks. "They'll fall like rain and vanish like it." In the Allied camps, the mood is the opposite of disbelief. It is focus. Training intensifies. Every man learns his route, his rally point, his contingency. Chalk diagrams of Norman villages cover barracks walls. Glider pilots rehearse landings on English pastures that mimic French fields. Mechanics work through the night tightening bolts, checking cables, counting parachutes one last time. At the top of the chain, General Dwight D. Eisenhower visits the airborne encampments in the days before departure. He walks among the men, shaking hands, answering questions with quiet resolve. His words are measured but unflinching. Full victory, nothing else. No speech of grandeur, no promise of safety, only the demand of necessity. For the men of the 82nd and 101st, the plan feels less like strategy and more like destiny. They will jump into darkness over unknown fields, guided by faith in training and in each other. The sky itself has become the front line, a battlefield without borders, without trenches, without retreat. Across the channel, the German bunkers wait in silence, watching the sea. They see no movement, hear no engines, and believe the night is theirs. But beyond the horizon, thousands of aircraft already idle on the runways of southern England. Engines hum beneath camouflage nets, pilots check watches, paratroopers tighten their straps and murmur final prayers. The plan to invade the impossible is complete. Now it only needs a storm and the courage to fly through it. And in a few hours, the sky will open and the impossible will begin to fall. June 5th, 1944. The wind over southern England begins to shift, steady at first, then restless, pulling at tents and tarps like a warning. Along hundreds of camouflaged airfields, thousands of men wait in silence, watching the daylight fade. They have trained for months, some for years, yet the moment feels impossibly still, as if the entire world has paused to take a breath. In the fading light, mechanics tighten straps and fuel hoses. Loadmasters count parachutes by touch, one after another, hands shaking just slightly. Around them, the air smells of oil, sweat, and wet grass. The invasion has already begun in spirit. Only the sky has yet to know it. Inside the makeshift chapels and hangars, the men of the 82nd and 101st Airborne kneel as chaplains move between them. Some bow their heads, others stare into the concrete floor, eyes tracing the cracks like maps of home. Prayers are spoken softly, the words ancient but the meaning immediate. Nearby, envelopes are sealed, letters written in pencil, addressed to mothers, wives, and children who will not read them unless the writer does not return. Outside, C-47 transports line the runways like sleeping beasts, wings stretching into the mist. Paratroopers move toward them in small columns, each man a bundle of gear and nerves. They are weighed down by equipment, rifles, grenades, ammunition, radios, rations, 70, sometimes 80 pounds of necessity. Their faces are blackened with charcoal to break the shine of skin. The white of their eyes glows faintly in the darkness. Commanders walk the rows, saying little. A hand on a shoulder, a nod, a few words of quiet reassurance. General Eisenhower moves among them that evening, smiling faintly, the strain of command etched beneath his cap. A photographer captures the moment, a general stooping to speak to men who will soon fall through darkness. His words are simple. Good luck, boys. At 22 YAF, a whistle cuts the air. Engines ignite in unison, a mechanical chorus rising into the night. The sound rolls across the countryside like thunder, the heartbeat of history. In every aircraft, the red cabin light glows dimly over helmets and faces. Men adjust their harnesses, check static lines, and stare at the open doors that wait behind them. At 22:30, the first wave lifts off. One by one, the C-47s climb into the storming sky, their navigation lights blinking in sequence, red, green, white, vanishing into low clouds over the channel. Behind them, more aircraft follow, a procession so vast it seems to have no end. The pilots fly through crosswinds and rain, trusting instruments more than sight. In the back, the paratroopers sit in silence, the drone of engines masking every thought except the next few hours. On the coast of France, German radar stations detect something unusual. At first, the screens flicker. A few dots, then dozens, then hundreds. Operators call for confirmation. "It must be weather," one suggests. "Birds," says another, but the dots multiply, filling the screens until the coast itself disappears beneath them. Officers shout into telephones, uncertain whether they are seeing illusion or invasion. In a mess hall not far from the Normandy shoreline, the same German officers who once mocked the idea of airborne troops look up at the sound of distant thunder. It is not thunder, it is the drone of engines. The sky, once dismissed as empty, has become the enemy's highway. In minutes, those who laughed will learn that the war they thought they understood is about to fall from the heavens. Midnight, June 6th, 1944. The sky over the English Channel is a black ocean, stirred by wind and flak. Beneath the clouds, a procession of more than 2,000 aircraft pushes eastward in formation, silver ghosts streaking through rain and tracer fire. Inside their holds, paratroopers sit in silence, the red light burning above them like a heartbeat. No man speaks. The sound of engines is their only prayer. As the French coast nears, the calm shatters. Searchlights spear the night, and anti-aircraft batteries open fire. Tracers claw upward, tearing through the clouds. The C-47s jerk and shudder as shells burst around them. Flashes of orange illuminating faces streaked with charcoal. A few planes vanish in mid-air, their fuel tanks erupting into fireballs that drift down like falling suns. Inside the transports that survive, the light changes to green. Jumpmasters shout, "Go! Go!" Men rise, hook their static lines, and shuffle to the door. The roar of the wind drowns everything else. In an instant, they are gone, swallowed by the dark. Thousands of parachutes bloom across Normandy's storm-torn sky. Some open too early, others too late. Wind and flak scatter the formations in every direction. Many never see their intended drop zones. One stick lands miles from its mark, another drifts into the flooded fields of the Murderette River, where men sink beneath their gear before cutting free. Officers land in orchards, privates in pastures, commanders lose their radios, squads lose their commanders. The invasion begins not with unity, but with chaos. In the darkness below, the land itself is a trap. German searchlights swing wildly through the mist, catching parachutes in their beams. Machine guns tear through hedgerows and fences, bullets snapping the cords above falling men. In Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, a paratrooper crashes through the roof of a barn and wakes to find himself alone, his rifle gone, surrounded by enemy voices. Elsewhere, a medic kneels beside a man tangled in a tree, cutting him free as tracer rounds pass through the branches. Yet amid the confusion, something extraordinary happens. Small groups begin to form, strangers calling out unit names, answering to any voice that sounds American. Leaders emerge not by rank, but by resolve. A corporal gathers 8 men from 4 different companies and moves toward the nearest gunfire. A lieutenant without a map uses the stars to find his bearings. Where orders fail, instinct leads. The months of training, the relentless discipline at Tokoa and Benning, take over. The Airborne does not wait for permission, it fights. By Au-2-Waug, the fields of Normandy are alive with movement. Isolated squads ambush German convoys, cut telephone lines, and seize crossroads. A machine gun crew, lost and half-soaked, sets up on a causeway near La Fière Bridge and halts an entire column of enemy trucks. Another group, guided only by the sound of church bells, heads towards Sainte-Mère-Église, the first French town they will liberate. In the villages below, the French awake to a strange sound, the hiss of parachutes, the murmur of English and American voices, the thud of rifles in the dark. To them, it seems as if the sky itself is raining soldiers. Farmers hide their sons, then open their doors to men who have fallen from the clouds. The invasion of France has begun, not on the beaches, but in their orchards and their fields. By dawn, the horizon burns red with gunfire. Hundreds are dead, hundreds more scattered. But the mission, impossible on paper, begins to take shape. German lines are breaking in places no commander expected. Bridges are falling to men who were never meant to find them. Confusion, once feared, has become strategy. High above, the next waves of transport still cross the channel. Their pilots unaware of the chaos below, unaware that the invasion's first victory is already being written in fragments, in fear, in the stubborn will to survive. The Germans had believed their coastal wall would hold against any army, but the storm had not come from the sea. It had fallen from the sky, and it was only just beginning to land. Sainte-Mère-Église, Normandy. Just past 1 a.m., the small town sleeps beneath an uneasy sky. Its cobblestone streets are dark, its church bell silent, its people long accustomed to the presence of German troops billeted in barns and houses. Then, somewhere beyond the horizon, the sound begins, a low, growing hum that does not belong to the earth. Paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne drift toward the town through wind and smoke. They have jumped blind into chaos, scattered, disoriented, each man guided only by instinct and gravity. Below them, Sainte-Mère-Église burns. A house near the square has caught fire, flames licking upward, casting an orange glow across the rooftops. The light, meant for no one, betrays them all. As the first parachutes drift into view, German sentries look up in disbelief. Then the shooting starts. Machine guns open from the churchyard, rifles from the alleys. The sky becomes a killing ground. Some paratroopers are hit before they reach the earth. Others hang helplessly from rooftops, the firelight painting their silhouettes against the night. It is not a battle yet. It is survival. Private John Steele of the 505th Parachute Infantry hits the edge of the square, his chute catching the church steeple. Wounded and dangling, he pretends to be dead as tracer rounds slice the air around him. Below, the fight turns desperate. Small groups of paratroopers land among gardens, fences, and flames. They cut themselves free, crawl through ditches, and begin to return fire. Within minutes, the tranquility of the Norman town vanishes. The square erupts in confusion. Germans shouting orders in the open, Americans firing from shadowed doorways. The church bell, struck by a bullet, tolls again and again over the chaos, marking each minute of the airborne assault. By 2 a.m., survivors begin to gather their strength. Officers, sergeants, and privates who have never met form improvised commands. They clear houses room by room, tossing grenades through windows, driving the Germans back toward the northern edge of town. In the faint firelight, civilians shelter in their basements, listening to the sounds of liberation and destruction mixing into one. Through the night, the paratroopers move with methodical calm. They take the church, fortify the stone walls, and set up a perimeter around the crossroads. Every street becomes a defensive line, every window a firing position. Ammunition runs low, but no one retreats. When dawn breaks over the hedgerows, Sainte-Mère-Église is no longer German. The first town in occupied France has been freed, not by tanks or fleets, but by a handful of men who fell from the sky and refused to die. In the early morning light, the villagers emerge. They find their square littered with parachutes, weapons, and bodies, American and German alike. The church is pocked with bullet holes, its windows shattered, its bell silent at last. The paratroopers, mud-streaked and hollow-eyed, stand watch at the crossroads, waiting for reinforcements that may never come. When the first rays of sun reach the steeple, Private Steele is still there, alive. Locals climb up and cut him down. He limps to join his unit, his presence a small miracle amid the ruin. Around him, the survivors count their dead. Of the men who dropped directly into Sainte-Mère-Église, many lie in the square they came to liberate. Far away, German command posts receive the first reports. Enemy paratroopers occupying Sainte-Mère-Église. Estimated strength, unknown. The numbers make no sense. How could a few dozen men have captured a fortified town? Officers read the message twice, convinced it must be exaggerated. But it is not. The impossible has already happened. What follows is disbelief, then alarm. If these Americans have landed here, how many more have landed elsewhere? The illusion of control begins to unravel. In one small Norman village, the myth of American inexperience burns away under fire. By dawn, the Germans realize too late that the front no longer lies at the beaches. It is here, in the orchards, the crossroads, and the steeples of France. And as the smoke clears over Sainte-Mère-Église, another group of paratroopers is already moving toward the bridges of the dawn. The night that began in chaos begins to take shape with the first light of dawn. Across the hedgerows of Normandy, the scattered fragments of the 82nd and 101st Airborne are slowly finding each other, lone silhouettes converging from orchards and ditches, drawn by instinct more than orders. Radios are lost, maps are useless, and yet somehow they move with purpose. What had fallen as fragments begins to reform as a force. The task before them is simple to describe and nearly impossible to achieve. Hold the bridges and causeways that connect the beaches to the interior. Without them, the landings at Utah and Omaha will stall. Tanks will drown in the flooded fields, and the invasion will die before it begins. Each minute matters more than any man can know. Near the village of Coquigny, the La Fière Bridge spans a narrow stretch of the Merderet River, a stone causeway no longer than a few hundred yards, yet vital to everything the Allies have planned. At dawn, paratroopers of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment dig into the western bank, their uniforms soaked, their ammunition dwindling. Around them, fog clings to the meadows where the night's parachutes still hang in the trees, like ghosts. The first German counterattack comes with the sunrise. Tanks appear through the mist, their engines growling, treads churning through waterlogged soil. Behind them, infantry advance cautiously, uncertain of what waits beyond the bridge. The Americans wait until the lead tank is halfway across before opening fire. Bazooka teams rise from ditches, machine guns burst from the hedgerows. The first vehicle explodes, blocking the path and turning the narrow bridge into a killing ground. For hours, the battle swings like a pendulum. The Germans shell the paratroopers' positions from the far bank, forcing them to fall back into the flooded meadows. Men wade through waist-deep water to find new ground, setting up fresh lines of fire. The wounded are pulled to the rear by their comrades. No medics, no supplies, only will. The air smells of mud and cordite. Every burst of gunfire is answered by another. By mid-morning, the paratroopers have turned the riverbank into a fortress of ruin. They fight with whatever remains: scavenged rifles, captured grenades, anything that can delay the next assault. Communication is carried by runners, their uniforms torn, faces streaked with mud. Above them, Allied aircraft streak inland, strafing columns of German reinforcements that are already too late. To the west, the beaches come alive. As the sun rises higher, the sea glows orange beneath the smoke of naval bombardment. The horizon swarms with ships, destroyers, troop carriers, landing craft by the hundreds. From the vantage points inland, the paratroopers can see it unfold. the invasion they were sent to protect. Every minute they hold the bridge buys another hour for the men storming the beaches. Every rifleman lying in the hedgerows is, in some quiet way, holding up the weight of the entire war. German commanders, watching from their headquarters farther inland, are slow to understand. They still believe the invasion is a feint, a distraction from Calais. By the time they realize the scale of the assault, the window for response has closed. Their reserves are trapped by destroyed bridges, blocked roads, and the chaos sown by airborne troops who were never meant to survive the night. The confusion that began as accident has hardened into conquest. At La Fière, the 82nd holds through another day and another night. Their losses are severe. Platoons reduced to handfuls, ammunition nearly gone, but the line does not break. When reinforcements from the beaches finally arrive, the paratroopers look less like soldiers than like survivors. Eyes hollow, faces burned by sun and smoke. Yet they have done what no plan could have guaranteed. They have held. By the evening of June 6th, the Allies are ashore. The beachheads expand, the ships unload, the tide of invasion begins to roll inland, and in the fields of Normandy, among the wreckage of gliders and the burned-out shells of German tanks, the airborne stand as the silent bridge between sea and victory. They had fallen into chaos and built from it a front line, but even as the bridges held, another battle was already beginning, a fight for the roads that would decide whether Normandy lived or died. June 7th, 1944. The dawn after D-Day breaks cold and grey across the Norman countryside. The beaches behind the paratroopers are secure, but their work is not finished. Between Utah and Omaha lies a single point of connection, the market town of Carrington, a crossroads of stone bridges and narrow streets. Without it, the two American beachheads remain divided. Without it, the invasion itself could still be strangled. The men of the 82nd and 101st Airborne begin their push south. They move through hedgerows, ancient earthen walls that turn every field into a fortress. The land itself resists them. Visibility is measured in yards. Every corner hides a rifle. German snipers wait in barns, in haystacks, in church towers. Progress is slow, costly, and made in silence. For 4 days, the paratroopers fight not across open plains, but through a maze of mud and blood. Each hedgerow must be taken by hand. Grenades over the wall, rifles at close range, bayonets in the dark. Ammunition runs low, water runs out. Men carry more fear than food. Still, they advance. On June 10th, the enemy counterattacks. The Fallschirmjäger, Germany's elite paratroopers, move in from the south. They are skilled, disciplined, and familiar with the same kind of warfare. Men who, only months earlier, had been considered the masters of airborne combat. Now they fight to reclaim that title. The clash between paratroopers from opposite sides of the sky turns the fields into fire. American positions are hammered by mortars and machine guns. The hedgerows echo with the sharp crack of Mausers, the dull thud of grenades. For hours the front shifts by mere feet. The Germans fight with precision and fury, and for a time it seems the line may buckle. But then the artillery finds its range. From miles away, American guns answer. Naval fire from destroyers offshore joins in, shells screaming overhead before crushing entire sections of the German line. Villages disappear in clouds of dust and flame. What had once been the careful geometry of French farmland becomes a wasteland of shattered trees and blackened soil. As the smoke clears, reinforcements arrive. Sherman tanks from the beaches, their tracks grinding through the mud, their engines low and steady. They push forward beside the paratroopers, turret guns swiveling from hedge to hedge. The combined force turns defense into collapse. German resistance falters. The Fallschirmjäger begin to fall back, fighting every step but losing ground with each one. By June 11th, the Americans reach the outskirts of Carentan. The town is a ruin before they even enter it. Walls cracked, bridges blasted, windows shattered. House by house, they clear the streets, tossing grenades through doorways, kicking down barricades. Machine guns rattle in alleyways. Smoke drifts through the market square. The final German positions crumble under artillery and tank fire. When silence finally falls, it is sudden, almost sacred. Carentan is theirs. For the paratroopers, there is no celebration. They move through the wreckage with the slow caution of men who have learned not to trust quiet. The town smells of cordite, ash, and rain. Civilians emerge from cellars, faces hollow, eyes wide. The liberation they had prayed for has come, but at a price measured in buildings and lives. The link between Utah and Omaha is now open. The Allied front is one continuous line stretching across Normandy. For the first time since 1940, a foothold on the continent belongs to freedom. From this bridgehead, the invasion will surge inland, to Saint-Lô, to Cherbourg, to Paris. Europe, piece by piece, will begin to fall in reverse. The men who secured Carentan do not know it yet, but their victory has done more than connect two beaches. It has stitched together the path to the end of the war, and beyond the smoke of the ruined town, the next challenge is already forming. A lesson not in triumph, but in fear. The guns have quieted over Normandy, but the echoes remain, in fields torn by shell fire, in villages half buried beneath rubble, and in the minds of the men who survived. The Germans who are captured in the days after Carentan speak with the same bewildered tone. "We thought you were everywhere," one officer confesses. "Every hedge, every field. We never knew where the next shot would come from." It was not the size of the American force that broke them. It was the illusion, the belief that the paratroopers were omnipresent, that the sky itself could disgorge an army at any moment. In the fog of invasion, numbers mattered less than imagination. Fear became the Allies' silent weapon. The German command structure, built on precision and control, could not comprehend the chaos that the airborne lived in naturally. Their reports contradict themselves. One unit claims hundreds of enemy paratroopers behind their lines. Another insists it was only a few dozen. Entire regiments are held in place, waiting for phantom forces that do not exist. Hours are lost. Orders go unanswered. The web of blitzkrieg, designed to move with speed and cohesion, begins to unravel under the weight of its own rigidity. Allied psychological operations understand the power of that fear immediately. Within days, leaflets and broadcasts across occupied Europe spread the legend of the Airborne. "They come without warning," one reads. "They land in darkness. They are the shadow of liberation." Propaganda turns reality into myth, myth into morale. The paratrooper becomes not just a soldier, but a symbol, the embodiment of courage, chaos, and inevitability. On the ground, captured Germans whisper about these men who fall from the sky, armed and fearless, appearing out of nowhere. Some call them sky devils, others simply the ghosts. The terror once reserved for the Luftwaffe's dive bombers now belongs to the men they once mocked as farm boys with parachutes. In Berlin, the mood is different, colder, analytical, resentful. Reports from Normandy are read in silence by officers of the General Staff. They speak of fragmentation, of encirclement, of the uncanny ability of small Allied groups to sow confusion far beyond their numbers. The logic of blitzkrieg, fast, concentrated, overwhelming, has been inverted. The enemy has turned its own philosophy against it. Hitler himself, in one of his rare lucid moments, refers to the American paratroopers as madmen who should not exist. He means it as an insult, but it is closer to a confession. The German faith in discipline and order has met something it cannot categorize, a kind of courage untethered from structure, born from improvisation and will. The sky, once the exclusive domain of the Luftwaffe, now belongs to another kind of mastery. Where once German bombers brought terror to cities, now American transports bring deliverance to villages. Each parachute is a declaration that the air, and the imagination it commands, no longer belongs to tyranny. The Wehrmacht learns, too late, that fear can move faster than any tank, and that courage, when multiplied by chaos, becomes a weapon no doctrine can predict. The paratroopers had fought not just for ground, but for the very psychology of war. By the time Berlin grasps the lesson, Normandy is lost. The invasion has become irreversible. And in the ruins of that realization, the architects of conquest begin to understand. The storm no longer answers to them. It answers to those who had the nerve to fall into it. The morning after the battle for Normandy breaks through a thick mist that rolls in from the Channel. The beaches, once alive with fire and fury, now lie beneath a pale and silent fog. Through it, men begin to emerge, mud-stained, hollow-eyed, carrying the weight of nights and days that no clock could measure. Paratroopers wander back toward the coast in small groups, their uniforms torn, their boots heavy with clay. They look less like soldiers than survivors of some unspoken storm. The insignia on their sleeves, the Screaming Eagle, the Double A, are darkened by soot and salt. Yet within those tired faces, something fundamental has changed. They have crossed the line between belief and proof. They are no longer amateurs. They are veterans. At field headquarters, commanders greet them not with speeches, but with silence. These are men who have done the impossible, dropped into darkness, fought without orders, and turned chaos into victory. Reports from every front read the same. Objectives taken, bridges held, enemy counterattacks broken. But the numbers do not capture the reality. They do not speak of the fear, the confusion, the loneliness that bound these men together more tightly than any chain of command. Each carries a piece of the night sky within him, the roar of engines, the flash of tracer fire, the weightless moment before the chute opened. The memory is not glorious. It is elemental. The sky became both cradle and grave, and those who survived it now walk with the quiet knowledge of what it took to come down alive. Commanders like Matthew Ridgway and James Gavin understand the transformation. They praise not precision, but persistence. The airborne divisions, once dismissed as reckless experiments, have proven something deeper than strategy, that flexibility and resolve can be as decisive as firepower. In an army built on order, these men have shown the strength of disorder, a controlled chaos that broke the enemy's predictability and rewrote the logic of war. By midsummer, the airborne are no longer viewed as auxiliaries. They are the spearhead. Their reputation spreads across Europe, whispered in foxholes and command tents alike. To the Germans, they are phantoms, men who appear where logic forbids. To the Allies, they are the soul of a new kind of warfare. Their courage is contagious. Their methods, doctrine. The lessons of Normandy become the blueprint for what comes next. Airborne units will lead again in Holland, in the Ardennes, across the Rhine. The fall from the sky, once a gamble, has become a science, a faith, a promise. The idea that once made generals laugh now reshapes entire campaigns. Yet among the men themselves, pride is tempered by memory. They speak quietly of those who did not return, of the ones lost in the swamps, the orchards, the fields. The friendships forged in the night remain unbroken, even as units are rebuilt and battles move on. Theirs is a brotherhood born not in barracks or briefings, but in the brief silence before a jump. that moment when each man stood alone and yet trusted that others were falling beside him. On the beaches of Normandy, supply ships unload in endless rhythm. Tanks roll inland, columns of infantry follow, and the invasion turns into occupation, then advance. But for the paratroopers resting by the dunes, the war feels distant. They have already fought theirs, in darkness, in fog, in faith. They watch the waves come and go, the mist rising from the sea that brought them here. Around them, the air smells of smoke and salt, of endings and beginnings. What was once mocked as madness has become method. What was called recklessness has become legend. The fall from the sky has not only changed a battle, it has changed the course of the war, and the men who lived through it will never again be the same. Beyond the fog, the fight will move east. But for now, the men who fell through the night can finally stand in the light of day. The summer of 1944 turns to autumn, and the war moves east. The beaches of Normandy fade into history, replaced by rivers, cities, and borders. For the airborne, there is no return to safety. Their war continues, carried on the wind. Holland, the Ardennes, the Rhine. Each drop becomes another test of endurance, another line in a legend still being written. In September, they rise again. Operation Market Garden, a bold strike into the heart of the Netherlands. Thousands of paratroopers fill the sky over Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem, their canopies blotting out the sun. The operation aims to seize a highway of bridges that will carry the Allies across the Rhine and into Germany itself. It is daring, beautiful in conception, and fatally ambitious. For days, the sky rains men and supplies. Some bridges fall swiftly, others are held against impossible odds. But at Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne becomes surrounded, isolated by German armor. The plan collapses under its own reach. Market Garden fails to end the war, yet it cements something else. The unshakable reputation of the airborne. Their courage is unquestioned, their sacrifice immortal. Even defeat cannot diminish them. Winter brings a new ordeal. December 1944, the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Snow falls thick over Belgium, muffling the thunder of artillery. German forces surge west in a final desperate offensive. The 101st Airborne, resting in France, is rushed north to the small town of Bastogne. They arrive with little ammunition, no winter gear, and no clear line of retreat. The enemy encircles them completely. For 7 days they hold. Artillery pounds their positions. Temperatures plunge below freezing. Supplies are dropped through clouds, each parachute a lifeline. When the Germans demand surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe sends back a single word: nuts. The message is more than defiance. It is identity. The airborne do not yield. They wait for the weather to clear, for the sky to open, for the promise of rescue that always seems to fall from above. By year's end, the siege is broken. The Germans withdraw. The snow turns red, then white again. Out of the Ardennes, the airborne emerge battered but unbroken, symbols of resilience forged in the coldest crucible of war. Spring brings the final crossing. Operation Varsity, March 1945. Once again, paratroopers take to the sky, this time over the Rhine River. It is the largest single-day airborne operation in history, executed in daylight, under fire. Gliders crash into fields, men leap through smoke and tracer fire. Within hours, the far bank of the Rhine is secured. The last natural barrier of Germany has fallen. The road to Berlin lies open. Across Europe, the legend spreads. German officers no longer mock the sound of engines overhead. They listen in silence, knowing what it means, that resistance will soon fall from the clouds. The airborne have become something more than soldiers. They are a signal, a storm that cannot be stopped. a doctrine born of risk and proven by necessity. Even the enemy learns to respect them. Captured Wehrmacht reports speak not of contempt, but of recognition. They come in darkness, one reads. They are few, but they change everything. The experiment that began with doubt and laughter has become an institution, an embodiment of the very traits that once seemed impossible to discipline: chaos, courage, adaptability. By the time the Rhine is behind them, the paratroopers are no longer a novelty of war. They are its evolution. And as the Third Reich crumbles, the men who once fell through the night now march across daylight, toward home, toward victory, toward the final silence that waits beyond the guns. Europe is quiet again. The thunder that once shook its skies has faded into memory. Across the continent, fields once scarred by parachutes and fire begin to bloom with spring. The war, at last, is over. For the men of the Airborne, it is time to go home. They return not as they left. The boys who once leapt from C-47s into darkness come back older than their years, carrying ghosts no uniform can hide. Their jumps are over, but the descent continues, inward now, into memory. At docks and train stations, they are greeted with bands, flags, and handshakes. Yet behind the smiles, there lingers the silence of those who have seen too much to celebrate easily. Many speak little of what happened over Normandy, Holland, or the Ardennes. The stories remain unspoken, sealed between brothers who were there and those who never will be. At reunions, their laughter is subdued, their toasts brief. The night they fell through flak and storm clouds belongs to them alone, a memory too vast for words, too personal for ceremony. The medals they receive, silver stars, distinguished service crosses, Purple Hearts, find their place in drawers and boxes. They gather dust beside photographs of youth, letters from home, and the tarnished wings that once glimmered on their chests. Pride gives way to something quieter, respect for the living and the dead alike. For some, the return to ordinary life proves harder than any battle. The discipline that kept them alive in chaos feels strange in the stillness of peace. Factories replace drop zones. City streets replace hedgerows. The night sky, once their ally, becomes just another part of the horizon. Yet even in this quiet, they carry with them the lessons of the Airborne creed: readiness, resilience, and the unspoken bond of those who trusted one another in freefall. Across America, the old training grounds at Toccoa and Fort Benning transform into schools for a new generation. Instructors pass on the stories without the sentiment: how to jump, how to lead, how to fight when lost and alone. The techniques are refined, the equipment improved, but the essence remains unchanged: courage before comfort, unity before fear. The experiment that once seemed reckless has become tradition. In time, their legend hardens into history. The paratrooper becomes a symbol, not of violence, but of daring, not of conquest, but of commitment. In films, in textbooks, in parades, they are remembered as men who fell from the heavens to reclaim the earth. Yet the truth is simpler and more human. They were ordinary men who answered an impossible call and, by doing so, changed the shape of modern war. In Germany, the officers who once laughed at the notion of air infantry now study their defeat in silence. In America, those same farm boys with parachutes return to farms, to classrooms, to families. The world they left behind has been remade, by their courage and by their cost. Years pass. The laughter of doubters fades into history's whisper. What remains is not noise or glory, but endurance, the quiet strength of men who fell through darkness and landed not just on soil, but in legacy. And when future soldiers stand beneath the same open sky, ready to jump into another unknown. They do so beneath the shadow and the promise of those first brothers who dared to fall. For them, the war ended long ago, but the wind that carried them still blows. In the quiet years after the war, historians would note a striking irony. The idea of soldiers falling from the sky, of war fought in 3 dimensions, had not been born in America at all. It had been German. The Fallschirmjäger, Hitler's paratroopers, were the first to test the concept, dropping into Denmark, Norway, Holland, and Crete. They were the ones who taught the world that men could descend from the clouds and conquer from above. But by 1944, that idea no longer belonged to Germany. It belonged to those who had learned from it, refined it, and turned it back against its creators. In less than 2 years, the United States had taken a daring theory and transformed it into doctrine, one forged by industry, tempered by training, and made human by courage. The experiment that once drew laughter now defined modern war. The contrast could not have been greater. In 1940, German paratroopers were the vanguard of blitzkrieg, bold, fast, devastating. Yet by 1944, the Luftwaffe was grounded, its fuel reserves empty, its wings clipped by Allied production and planning. While German aircraft rusted on runways, American factories in Michigan and California rolled out thousands of C-47 transports. The sky turned from a German weapon into an Allied highway. It was not just numbers that changed the balance, but philosophy. The Allies understood that the airborne soldier was more than a weapon. He was a message. He embodied adaptability, mobility, and faith in the impossible. He did not wait for conditions to be perfect. He made them so. The paratrooper represented a new kind of warfare, one that valued initiative over obedience, audacity over order. The Luftwaffe once ruled Europe's skies. Its bombers terrorized London, its fighters guarded the Reich, but the same heavens it once commanded became its undoing. American bombers now flew unchallenged across the continent. Their contrails carved white lines over cities that had once been symbols of power. Beneath them, Allied paratroopers crossed those same skies, landing where no army had ever marched. In this shift, something deeper than technology had changed. Industrial power had married human courage. The machine and the man, each useless without the other, now operated as one. Every parachute that opened over Normandy, Holland, or the Rhine was more than fabric and cord. It was the union of ingenuity and will, a declaration that no frontier, not even the sky, would remain untamed. By the end of the war, the airborne divisions had done more than win battles. They had redefined what an army could be. They showed that mobility could rival mass, and that courage could outthink command. The old hierarchies of warfare, trenches, fronts, static lines, had been shattered by men who moved in silence, fell from darkness, and fought where strategy could no longer reach. Historians would later trace a straight line from those jumps to every conflict that followed: Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East. The legacy of the airborne lived not just in tactics, but in mindset, the belief that boldness, multiplied by preparation, could tilt the course of history. And so, the sky that had once been feared became familiar. What was once a barrier became a bridge. For the men who conquered it, altitude was not danger, it was destiny. The fall, once seen as madness, had become the rise, and beyond that rise lay the final act, a reckoning not of victory or defeat, but of memory, and the silence that follows when history exhales. In the spring of 1944, in a stone-walled mess hall somewhere in occupied France, German officers laughed. They laughed at the notion of American air infantry, farm boys with parachutes, untested and unarmed, until they touched the ground. They mocked the idea that any soldier could fall from the heavens and fight his way to victory. Their laughter, recorded in memories and reports, was confident, practiced, certain. Hours later, that certainty would vanish into the night. Across the channel, those same farm boys were fastening harnesses, checking static lines, and stepping into aircraft that would carry them into darkness. They did not yet know where they would land, only that the sky above France would be their battlefield. When they leapt, they carried more than weapons. They carried an idea, that courage could fall faster than fear, and that belief itself could be a weapon. When the paratroopers dropped over Normandy, they rewrote the logic of invasion. The old rules, lines, fronts, formations, dissolved the moment they hit the ground. In their place came chaos, and from chaos, mastery. Units shattered by wind and flak became improvised armies. Commanders found themselves leading strangers. The mission was no longer about maps or plans, but about momentum, the simple act of moving forward when every direction was uncertain. By dawn, the men once dismissed as amateurs had seized bridges, crossroads, and towns. Sainte-Mère-Église was free. The causeways behind Utah Beach were open. German communication lines were paralyzed. In a single night, the Airborne had inverted the balance of power, not by overwhelming numbers, but by overwhelming belief. The Wehrmacht, trained to fight with order and precision, had no defense against an enemy that thrived in the opposite. Those who survived the drop understood the scale of what they had done only later. Their courage had not come from command. It had come from conviction. They had fought in darkness and confusion, yet somehow found direction. They had fallen apart, and in doing so, they had learned how to come together. The German officers who once scoffed at the thought of parachute infantry now read reports that defied comprehension. Dozens of small engagements had splintered their rear defenses. Convoys had vanished. Bridges had fallen. The enemy had appeared where none should be. What had begun as a joke in a mess hall had become a military nightmare. Arrogance had measured men by armor, by rank, by the weight of machines. But history measured them by will, by their ability to act when reason said it was impossible. In Normandy, in Holland, in the Ardennes, the airborne divisions proved that belief could be engineered as surely as any weapon. From darkness they fell. From chaos they won. Their story is not one of invincibility, but of transformation, the moment when war itself changed shape. The airborne were not designed to replace the infantry or the tank. They existed to bridge the gap between earth and sky, between strategy and improvisation. They were the proof that courage, when organized and disciplined, could transcend its own limits. In the years that followed, their legacy grew quieter but no less powerful. The laughter that had once filled that German mess hall became a ghostly echo in history's corridors, replaced by respect, even reverence. For the first time, armies began to measure their strength not only in steel and firepower, but in adaptability, resilience, and spirit. It was not technology alone that had won in the skies above Normandy. It was conviction, multiplied by thousands, each man trusting that the unseen would hold him until he landed. They were ordinary men, elevated by faith in something greater than themselves. When the Germans first heard the engines that June night, they believed the sound meant nothing. But by morning, that sound had become prophecy, the thunder of an idea descending from the clouds. And in that moment, every nation that had doubted learned the same truth, that laughter is the language of comfort, and comfort has no place in history's turning points. In 1944, they laughed at the thought of men falling from the heavens. Hours later, they were surrounded by them. They laughed once, They never laughed again.